The sky doesn't open so much as it clenches, a fist of black glass, squeezing the color out of a dying horizon, until the world left beneath it is the shade of old bruises. And in that pressure, the air makes a noise like a long, low breath, finally forced between teeth. Something enormous exhales. The ground bows and a green star falls like a verdict, slamming into a salt flat that remembers being an ocean, pulverizing crystal into a cloud of glittering knives that hang for an instant in the tense hush before deciding to fall. At the center of the crater, the thing that fell plants both hands into earth that is not earth, and pushes himself upright as if hauling a mountain out of himself, muscles sliding under skin like cables drawn over winches, veins lit with a soft, sick, phosphorescent echo that has nothing to do with sunlight. Hulk, no banner, no compromise, inhales, tasting iron and ozone, and a faint medicinal sweetness that belongs to machines. And he frowns because the wind doesn't smell like wind. It smells like a room pretending to be weather, a sterile theater where storms are rehearsed and never performed. And somewhere far away, a sound begins like a tuning fork struck against the skull of the world. The plane lifts its face to be seen, and the horizon rearranges itself with the diffident certainty of something that has done this 1,000 times. Towers extrude from the crust in spirals of seamless alloy, their ribs a mesh of luminous threads that pulse in time with the tuning fork hum. Domes rise and lens themselves into cruelty. Walkways unfurl like tongues of mercury between colonnades whose capitals are crowned with stylized skulls that are not human, yet insist on being recognized. Glyphs bloom across surfaces with the grace of frost and the condescension of doctrine, repeating in a script Hulk cannot read, but somehow understands to mean measure, inventory, harvest. Even the sun gets in on the lie, dragging itself up a fraction and quivering there like a lamp on a dimmer switch, as if to say, "We can brighten this if your performance improves." He turns his head one way, then the other, slow, patient, a predator in a museum, and the tuning fork note climbs half a pitch, and the salt crystals around his feet stand at attention, forming 4 neat rows, because somewhere the conductor has tapped the stand with his baton and the orchestra is almost ready. And that's when the seam appears, not a tear. A seam, taut and purposeful, stitching 2 incompatible fabrics together. And when it pulls, it doesn't rip so much as persuade space to reconsider its contract. And from that courteous incision, a figure steps out with the unhurried arrogance of someone who has already paid for the room with centuries of violence. Boots touch salt, and the salt melts under them from intimidation alone. Hair catching a faint blue from a sun that is pretending not to watch. Arms folded not in petulance, but in economy. Why waste motion when the world will oblige? The air chooses to move around him rather than through him. Vegeta does not announce himself because that would suggest the scene required improvement. And he is here as proof that it does not. That, for a second, they regard one another across the crater lip. The giant and the prince, green and midnight, one built like a verdict and the other like a knife, both wearing expressions that make the landscape try to remember if it has anywhere else it needs to be. Then Hulk rolls one shoulder, the joint popping like a boulder, deciding to give up being a boulder and become a hammer. And the towers in the mid-distance tremble as if sympathetic. Vegeta's mouth curves upward by half a contempt, not enough to count as a smile, but sufficient to register as acknowledgement that the opponent has a shape worth breaking. Where? He says, the accent on the word like a ridge of bone under silk. Is this counterfeit? Hulk tilts his head, listening to the tuning fork hum, modulate again, just a hair sharper now. The sound no longer a tone, but a tally. Not Earth, he says, simple because truth doesn't require adjectives when you're strong enough to carry it. He sniffs again, and the smell is book clean and bloodless, and that makes something old in him unhappy. It's a pen, Vegeta says, disdain turned into statement. A pen with delusions of cathedral. Hulk considers the towers, the way their luminous veins accelerate each time either of them breathes more aggressively than the script expects. And he feels it, a thin, polite tug along the nerves, like the first sip of anesthetic, like a hand on a shoulder at a hospital door saying we just need a little more blood. He bares his teeth. Pen wants Hulk to write, he says, and there is no humor in it. Pen wants you to perform, Vegeta corrects, chin lifting a fraction, eyes tracking a flight of clockwork midges rising from a cornice and fanning out to triangulate them. Flies, Hulk says. Cameras, Vegeta answers, and the word is a curse delivered with surgical precision. The plane around the crater responds like an audience that needed only a cue. Plates of alloy lift and rotate into bleachers. An avenue of pylons knight themselves with spikes. And the air fills with motes that aren't dust and aren't pixels, but something between. Smart glitter. Each speck a question mark. The hum fattens into chord, low and patient. The kind of sound that makes you think about the size of your lungs. And it is only when the chord resolves that the voice arrives. It does not come from the towers or the sky or the ground. It comes from the accounting between them, the space where invoices are reconciled and expectation wears a smile made of doors. Contestants present, it says, not loud, not soft, merely inevitable. Parameters, maximum expression. Metrics, yield, threshold, failure curve. Null sovereign, observing. Vegeta's eyes flick sideways. One heartbeat's worth of contempt turned reconnaissance. There, he says. And Hulk feels it too now. An absence masquerading as a throne. A silhouette cut into the air at the axis of the largest dome. Not a body, but a cross-section. As if the architect ran out of matter and switched to idea. An outline that keeps changing scale depending on whether you admit you are afraid. Sovereign, Hulk repeats, making the title sound like a weight he is eager to set down through someone's skull. Null, Vegeta says, making the other half sound like the only honest part of the name. The stands fill with no one. That is, the bleachers resolve into strata of negative space shaped like crowds, cavities carved in the shape of spectators too important to show up, and those shapes lean forward with mechanical hunger. The first movement of the symphony is modest. Silver figures rise from trenches in ranks of 20, their armor jointed with living light that pulses in applause with each step they take. Helms featureless except for a single lens, the color of an unslept night. Each carries a staff at once weapon and metric, a rod that hums louder whenever it points at either warrior, as if satisfaction can be measured in decibels. Vegeta does not ask for terms. He draws breath, not Kai yet, just enough pride to fog the glass of heaven, and the rods lift. The cord swells, the null sovereign's outline sharpens into something almost like a face, and then refuses the courtesy. Hulk says nothing, because language is a cage if you're not careful. He lowers his center of gravity, the salt underfoot cracking with relief to have a purpose. And for a moment, both creatures are still enough that the world considers forgiveness and then remembers what was paid for. The silver ranks advance, feet in perfect agreement with the idea of step, and the first staff flicks like a conductor's baton, and a filament of pale fire lashes out, scoring a line across Hulk's chest that smokes without burning. He looks down, not at the mark, but at the way the filament retracts and feeds itself not back into the staff, but into the floor, down into the veinwork of the arena, where the light deepens by a fraction. Harvest, Vegeta says, quiet. Tax, Hulk says, quieter, and the voice agrees, almost cheerful. Optimization event confirmed. He moves first, because patience is a luxury he affords no tyrant. A single stride, and the world has to redo its arithmetic. A single swing and 4 silver torsos learn the cost of pretending to be men. It's not a punch so much as a policy. And when the bodies break, the floor sings with satisfaction and the cord swells and the bleachers of nobody ripple as though a good joke was told. The rods sweep. 10 filaments cross his back and his skin disobeys them. But the light goes into the veins beneath the stage, and the null outline brightens like a smirk. Vegeta is a rumor made of math. Here, then there, then behind, then above. His movement a series of contemptuous edits to the arena's thesis. He doesn't go blue because that would be generosity. He ghosts through the first rank at a level of power that insults and instructs simultaneously. 2 fingers extended, a beam the width of a whisper darning 10 helms shut. The bodies lock in mid-step, collapse with theatrical grace, and the floor purrs as the energy returns to the grid like tithes delivered on time. Yield increasing, the voice notes, pleased. Very good, sustain. We don't take notes, Vegeta says, and his aura twitches, a violin string plucked hard enough to bruise the air. Hulk smashes through the next file of soldiers, and the sound this time is not metal, but glass, being asked an impossible question. And as the shards fall, their edges soften midair and powder. And that powder slides obediently into channels etched in the salt that weren't there a second ago. And the channels go bright, and the null sovereign's silhouette stops pretending to be uninterested. Enough, Hulk says, to the world, to the rods, to the way his own heartbeat keeps syncing with the cord. And the floor tries to translate the command into compliance, but the system beneath it is older and better funded. The silver detachments continue to arrive, and with each cohort the rods calibrate, filaments fatter, resonance deeper, skin prickling like a memory of cold. And Vegeta's eyes narrow because he recognizes the curriculum. Force escalations designed not to kill, but to tempt, to coax pride and fury out into the open where they can be itemized and consumed. He drops, lands beside Hulk without looking at him, their shoulders almost touching and then not, the space between them, a dignified treaty that requires no signature. Listen, he says. The word, a blade, slipped under the cords of an executioner's rope. And Hulk listens, really listens, the way a man might listen in the dark for a child's breath after a hospital discharge. And he hears it, in the hum, a second, lighter tone, and under that a tick, and under that a whisper of air not moving through lungs, but through an instrument, a bellows hidden under the world, patient, hungry, clinical. The rods don't feed the grid is the straw, and the dome is the mouth, and the outline at its center is a throat that refuses to choose a shape. It eats the fight, Hulk says, and his voice is almost gentle with the relief of naming a problem large enough to hit. "Then don't feed it," Vegeta says, and he steps forward in a gesture so small it looks like mercy. The next wave hits, and he does not answer with light. He answers with footwork, with the quiet science of angles, with hands that do not waste force, proving that force exists. He parries filaments with wrists, redirects rods with fingers. And when he strikes not the armor or even the men inside it, but the staffs themselves at the joint where method lives, breaking measurement. And when the rods fail, they cough sparks that the floor can't drink, and the hum stutters. Hulk learns the move as it happens, and his next blow is not a hammer, but a tuning fork tuned to wrongness. A meat and bone wedge jammed into the seam, where the grid's rhythm enters the soldier's tools, and 3 more rods die. And the light beneath the stage flickers like a hand hesitating over a switch in a dark hallway. The Null Sovereign acknowledges with a single change of key. The chord drops. The air gets thicker. The bleachers lean as if to whisper. The outline of a face accumulates features that are almost familiar in the way nightmares wear borrowed noses. And in the very center of that, not face, a single eye opens, not round but elliptic, a lens stacked with lenses. And there is nothing in it like wrath or even interest, only appetite organized into policy. Contestants resisting, admirable, the voice says, all approval, no warmth. Escalate. The floor splits in clean, bloodless seams, and the soldiers stop pretending to be a problem. The arena offers a better one. 4 pylons rise at the compass points, each crowned with a ring of black light spinning inward like water down a drain. And the hum becomes pressure, and the pressure becomes a grip. And Hulk's skin crawls and Vegeta's vision thins around the edges, as if the room is trying to press them into thinner versions of themselves that the grid can digest more easily. Don't, Hulk tells the world, because he has learned that sometimes the world is a child overhearing a fight, and you must tell it you are not leaving. He sets his feet and refuses to be thinner. The salt under his heels powders to paste. The pylons whine, discouraged. "Show me," Vegeta says, but his voice is not to Hulk. It is to the outline, to the mouth that will not be a mouth, to the administrative god that calls itself null. "Show me your hand." And because pride is a vice shared by sovereigns and Saiyans and systems, it does. The dome's inner skin iris opens, petal by petal, an anatomy lesson in obedience, revealing at last the throat. No meat, no heat, only a column of braided dark that drinks light like a polite guest finishing the glass you offered. Around it float rings engraved with scripts too honest to be holy, counters spinning with 4 digits that climb whenever either of them breathes hard. And at the base, the column roots into a core like a stopped heart whose stillness has been engineered, a thing that does not beat because beating would confess need. Vegeta spits a syllable so short it's almost light. "He wants us to go blue," he says. "He wants you to roar. He'll turn glory and anger into numbers and numbers into God." Hulk stares at the core and sees a mirror that tells only how much and never what. And he wants very badly to break it, which is an instruction the system would love to intercept. He looks at Vegeta. Vegeta is already looking at him. 2 beings built to escalate do the cowardly, saintly thing. They don't. Hulk pulls his breath in and holds it until it stops trying to become a shout. The green in his veins dims from blaze to coal. The hum drops a note like disappointment. Vegeta lets his aura settle to the thinnest outline of a crown, pride expressed as stillness, and the pylons complain. their black rings slowing like gyroscopes, hungry for attention. Optimization, failing, the voice notes. And this time there is a hint, just a hint of irritation, like a surgeon discovering the body will not accept the graft. Introduce catalyst. The floor at the center of the arena folds in on itself like a pupil, constricting in bright light. And what rises has the indecency to be beautiful. A statue that is not a statue, feminine and not, carved from the same alloy as the towers, but shot through with veins of dormant red like fossilized lightning, its face a mask of tranquil indifference, and in its hands, a bowl that should be water, but is a slow galaxy, stars wheeling in syrup. The null sovereign's voice lowers itself until it is almost tender. Behold mediatrix, yield interface, offer, accept. Vegeta's mouth tightens because the trap is exquisite. Offer mercy, demand devotion, take both. Hulk steps toward it because he can smell a door behind the statue, a passage inside the machine. But the bowl turns toward him as if seeking his reflection. And in the galaxy liquid, a shape brightens. A small, careful figure with a round head and trembling hands, and a voice Hulk remembers as a lighthouse in a bad sea. He stops like a wall, surprised to discover it is fallible. The image is crude, wrong in the fingers, wrong in the smile, but it is a wrongness engineered to be good enough from across the room. The bowl shows Vegeta something else. He doesn't have to say what it is because his throat says it for him, a brief tightening like a man choosing not to pick up a relic. The voice is almost kind. You fight for nothing. Fight for this. The arena leans, the pylons purr, the rods chime, the bleachers of nobody widen their absences. The null sovereign's lens eye dilates, expectation black as a ledger. Hulk's hands rise, and then stop, and then lower, and the ground is so grateful it cracks. Vegeta lowers his chin until the crown of his head points at the statue's breastbone, and for a second something like grief crosses his face and learns it cannot stay. No, he says, and the word is a temple he burns himself and does not leave. Hulk looks up at the lens and says it too, and the word comes out wrong and perfect, a low animal refusal that the system lacks a place for. The mediatrix cools. The syrup galaxy dims. The null sovereign sighs, in a frequency that makes the towers curve inward by one imperceptible degree, an architectural flinch that will bother engineers for decades. Contestants, defective, proceed to extraction. The floor blooms with sigils like surgical drapes, and the air grows hands where air should not. All grasp and polish, and in the seam that opened to bring Vegeta here, a new seam opens, this one without manners, and the tuning fork hum comes back not as music but as a drill. Hulk looks at Vegeta, and Vegeta looks at Hulk, and whatever treaty they didn't sign becomes a banner anyway. Left, Vegeta says, and is already moving right. Up, Hulk says and drives both fists down. Their lies complete each other's geometry, and the first wave of grasping air breaks like a wave on rocks that remember how. They move as if they practiced this, which they did not, which is what makes the null sovereign's lens flicker for the first time. The dome murmurs with a new sound, one the system did not schedule, excitement. Far beneath the stage, in the throat of the core, a small forbidden beat tries itself on for size and stops, embarrassed to be alive. The null sovereign decides to stand. It does not have legs, So it invents two out of negative space and strutted math. And as it rises, the towers lean farther, the bleachers empty themselves into deeper emptiness. The pylons spin backward, and for the first time, the outline has weight. It is not a god, but it has learned to pretend with a budget. It lifts a hand that is not a hand and points at the two problems who refuse to escalate on cue. And the arena's chord climbs towards something ugly and necessary. Hulk feels his heart try to match it and tells it no. Vegeta feels the blue ache like a lover at the door and tells it later. The statue begins to turn its bowl away, star syrup sloshing in slow, disappointed arcs. The rods steady, the filaments thicken, the harvest books open wide and the wiring under everything. And somewhere, very close to the center of the null, a hairline fracture writes itself across an invisible surface, because the system cannot understand being refused by things it has already measured. Hulk smiles then, small and mean, the kind of smile nobody taught him. Vegeta's mouth twitches in what, in a gracious universe, might someday be mistaken for agreement. We starve it, Vegeta says. We starve it and break its mouth and walk out. We starve it, Hulk says, and then eat it. The Null Sovereign's lens glitters, and if a ledger could sneer, this would be the sound. Proceed, the voice says, and the arena obeys, like a god that forgot how to be loved. The light had not faded, it had only condensed. When Hulk and Vegeta regained awareness, the ground beneath them was no longer stone, but a living membrane of pulsing energy. The arena had transformed into something breathing, sentient, and angry. The Null Sovereign had awakened. The air was thick with a mechanical heartbeat that made the sky tremble. Every pulse sent vibrations through their bones, like whispers of metal and mourning. Hulk clenched his fists, green light leaking from his pores like molten veins, while Vegeta floated above the trembling surface, aura flickering violet blue like dying starlight. A deep hum resonated through the void, too low to be sound, too deep to be heard. It crawled under their skin, rewriting their rhythm. The Null Sovereign's voice came not as words, but as verdicts, each syllable carved into their minds like law. You starve me. The horizon rippled, and the remnants of the arena bent inward like a throat closing around them. Black towers rose, twisting into shapes reminiscent of skeletal spires, their tips crowned with what looked like eyes made of glass and data. Those eyes blinked, and the world screamed. Hulk staggered, clutching his head. Images flooded his mind. Wars, loss, destruction. Every moment his rage had ever burned bright. The Sovereign was feeding, consuming every spark of emotion like a god drinking from a storm. Vegeta roared in defiance, his aura flaring until lightning cracked across the false heavens. Get out of my head, he shouted, hurling a blast of raw Kai at the nearest tower. It hit with the force of a dying star, but instead of shattering, the tower absorbed it, veins of light spreading up its sides as though the attack had nourished it. Hulk's voice thundered beside him, guttural, primal. It's eating our power. No, Vegeta replied through gritted teeth. It's feeding on our will. The realization struck them both. The Sovereign thrived not on energy but on emotion, the pure expression of conflict. The more they fought, the stronger it became, a perfect prison for warriors. It wants us to fight each other again, Vegeta muttered, eyes narrowing. Then, Hulk not play. Hulk slammed both fists into the ground, shattering the living floor. The pulse of energy that erupted shot skyward, ripping open the red sky and exposing layers of circuitry beneath the fabric of space. For a brief moment, they could see the machinery of creation, miles of gears forged from galaxies, turning in slow, divine rhythm. The sovereign's voice thundered again. Resistance is nourishment. From the cracks poured liquid metal, forming humanoid figures, twisted reflections of Hulk and Vegeta, their features distorted, eyes hollow, each one moving like puppets animated by memory. Vegeta's breath caught as one of them smirked with his own grin. Copies, he hissed, our rage made flesh. Hulk tore through one immediately, splattering it into shards of glowing metal, but for each one destroyed, 2 more rose. Their movements were perfect imitations, every strike mirroring the originals with algorithmic precision. Vegeta darted between them, his fists moving too fast to see, Kai detonations illuminating the world like miniature suns, yet still they multiplied. They're learning, Vegeta growled, panting. Every blow teaches them more. Hulk roared, shaking the planet, his aura bursting outward in a shockwave that vaporized hundreds of the clones at once. For a fleeting second, silence followed, and then, like an ocean inhaling, the entire horizon filled with them again. It's endless, Vegeta shouted. No, Hulk said, eyes glowing pure white. Hulk endless. He leapt into the sky and came down like an asteroid, fists first. The impact broke the world. The pulse that followed annihilated everything for miles, leaving only molten light and a storm of debris. Vegeta shielded himself, watching the devastation in awe and fury. But when the dust cleared, the duplicates weren't gone. They had changed. Their forms had shrunk into filaments of light, streams of pure energy drawn back into the heart of the world. The voice returned, calm, satisfied. You are the offering. I am the altar. The surface beneath them began to rise. A mountain, no, a being, emerged from the void, its body an amalgam of shattered architecture, bones of machines, and veins of stars. It was humanoid but titanic, its face a swirling black mirror that reflected everything and nothing at once. Each step it took rewrote gravity. Each breath pulled sound out of the air. Hulk and Vegeta floated before it, ants before a deity. Vegeta's voice was steady, cold. This is what's left when gods forget mercy. Hulk's reply was simple. Then Hulk reminded. He hurled himself at the giant, punching its chest with a force that cracked dimensions. The impact scattered pieces of the sovereign into fragments of dark glass. But from every shard grew tendrils of light that reformed the wound instantly. It healed faster than they could harm it. Vegeta streaked past Hulk, gathering energy into his palms until the glow blinded even his Saiyan eyes. Final flash. The beam cut through the void, slicing the sovereign's head clean off. For a heartbeat, victory existed. Then the head dissolved into a mist of silver dust that reattached itself to the body like nothing had happened. The sovereign laughed, a deep, soundless quake that rippled through existence. I am recursion. Every act defines me. Every attempt feeds me. Vegeta snarled, then let me redefine you. He teleported directly in front of the entity's face, Kai spiraling around his body like a violet storm. Hulk joined him, both forces converging in a combined strike that tore through layers of space-time. The explosion was total, light and sound annihilating everything for a second that lasted forever. When reality returned, they stood in a void of gray mist. The sovereign was gone, or so they thought. Then the mist formed words. Not symbols, not sound. Words, written across space in burning text. Null sovereign reconfiguration. Human scale. The fog condensed. In its place appeared a figure roughly their height, humanoid, robed in fractal cloth made of galaxies, its face a smooth, featureless void. Its voice now came gentle, almost compassionate. "Now we can speak as equals." Hulk took a step forward. "Hulk not talk?" Vegeta raised an eyebrow, his aura still flickering. "Then I will." The being tilted its head. "You defy my purpose. You refuse the natural order of destruction. Every story ends in conflict. Every hero feeds the next myth. Without that, existence collapses. I am the maintenance of that cycle." "So you're a parasite," Vegeta spat. "No," it said softly. "I am meaning. Without me, your rage, your pride, your power all dissolve into void." Hulk growled low. "Then Hulk smash meaning." The Sovereign smiled, or something like it. "Then we are already kin." Without warning, it vanished, reappearing behind them. Hulk swung, Vegeta turned, both striking in perfect synchronization. But the being moved like an afterthought, weaving between their blows, its every motion rewriting momentum itself. Each punch that missed became a hole in space, and through those holes, they glimpsed flashes of other universes, versions of themselves long dead, long victorious, long forgotten. "You see," the Sovereign whispered, appearing between them again. "You are endless repetitions of the same tragedy. I am simply the echo." Vegeta's patience broke. He screamed, his Super Saiyan blue aura erupting into pure white flame as he lunged. "Then I'll erase the echo." His fist connected, and for the first time, the Sovereign bled. Black light oozed from its chest, coiling around Vegeta's arm like oil alive. Hulk followed through, driving his fist through the creature's torso, and the world exploded again. But this time, they didn't emerge in the same dimension. The blast sent them spinning through the collapsing architecture of the Null Realm, fragments of space folding in on themselves. They landed on a cliff overlooking what looked like a dying sun, a sphere cracked open, leaking light like blood. Around it drifted fragments of planets, monuments, and bones. Vegeta rose, scanning the ruins. "Where the hell are we now?" Hulk looked up. Above them, in the cracked sky, the Sovereign reappeared, larger than ever, wings of code stretching to infinity. "The next layer," it said, "where cycles are repaired." The light intensified until everything became white. Hulk and Vegeta braced themselves. The battle had only begun, but they both understood something now. This was not a fight to win. It was a fight to decide what deserved to exist. The white did not fade so much as acquire texture, a grain-like breath held too long. And then the color returned in ash and iron, a horizon scoured to wire and bone, where mountains were the ribs of something that had tried to be a universe and failed. Heat leaked from a cracked star hanging low and close as a sick sun, its surface crazed with fault lines that pulsed like eyelids learning to blink. And between those pulses, the ground made a sound like teeth grinding. Hulk stood in it up to the ankles and felt the grit, tried to memorize his weight, while above him Vegeta hung motionless, aura narrowed to a blade so thin it was closer to promise than light, both of them listening, because the layer itself was speaking, not with a voice, but with the etiquette of machines that pretend they have a soul, vectors aligning, distances deciding to be shorter when looked at, the sky's seams tightening as if embarrassed to have been seen. When the Null Sovereign appeared, it chose honesty. Tall again. Not cathedral tall, but continent tall, a biped of ledger stone and script, wings like drafting tools open to the tensile limit, its face a vertical eclipse in which equations swam like frightened fish. Reset tier, it said without saying, and the dying star hiccuped, a swallow of light going down the wrong throat, and the landscape rolled a centimeter closer to them in apology. Vegeta's eyes clicked once to Hulk and back, a tacit check of breath and bruise. Then he rose higher, palms open, not to gather power, but to shape silence. "No more offerings," he said, and the words didn't echo because the place disliked plural nouns. The sovereign began to walk, each step a policy decision, and where its feet touched the world, the faults in the star brightened. As above, so below, deliberate as harvest. Hulk took one step forward, and all the broken glass in the plain whispered his name, not as worship, but as inventory, and he smiled in a way that made the plane decide to be a little less brave. "It still eats fights," he said low. "It eats refusal, too," Vegeta answered, narrower and colder. "Then we give it neither," Hulk said, and the grin died into concentration. He rolled his shoulders and let everything that was easy drain out through his feet. The convenient rage, the reflex roar, the hammer that wants every problem to be a nail. And in the cored-out quiet that remained, something Banner used to call aim arranged itself behind his eyes, like furniture built to be climbed. Above him, the Saiyan did the blasphemous inverse. He compacted pride until it was a seed, a white-hot kernel buried in an unmoved mind, not a flame to be seen, but a sun under ice. The sovereign paused, misliking input outside the syllabus. "Non-compliance recorded," it said, and the star cracked again, a thin black fissure running pole to pole in bleeding cold. Out of that wound, the layer exhaled its defense. Not soldiers this time, but instruments, spindled tripods rising from the ash like herons, each crowned with a ring that spun in opposite directions at once, each ring sifting the air for frequencies it could tax. When their sightlines crossed over Hulk's chest, an ache like bad memory kneaded his heart. Old humiliations queued on a loop for harvest. Vegeta dropped a meter, just enough to force 3 rings to re-aim and disagree about what he was. Then a meter more, and in those micro-arguments he heard, faint as a hairline crack in a wine glass, the engine under the layer adjusting its suction. "Hear it," he said, a breath more than a word. Hulk nodded, and in that nod their plan assembled without needing to be told. Starve, then starve sharper, then break not the eater, but the throat. The tripods spun harder, the rings whining, their hum drilling at the hinge of the jaw inside the skull. And Hulk let the noise crawl and do nothing with it. He bent, picked up a shard of world the size of a tombstone and the weight of an apology, and didn't throw it. He listened to the way the tripods recalculated for a throw that didn't happen, how the layer's suction wavered on a ghost of impact. "Again," Vegeta said, and he became motion without consequence, feints stitched into feints, steps that promised angles and paid them with stillness. And the tripods sang richer as they chased an attack that didn't come. The fissure in the star widened, light spilling wrong, not outward but inward, sucked toward the sovereign's chest, where a lattice hung like a harp, strung with organized hunger. Hulk's grin returned, uglier and better. He didn't leap. Leaping would be a sermon, and instead walked, slow as insult, toward a tripod, its rings slicing decimals out of the air. He put 2 fingers to the metal and pushed them together lightly, as if closing a child's eyelids, and the counter-rotations met and canceled in a cough of black sparks. Ash skittered backward as the suction dipped. "Mouth," he said. "Throat," Vegeta corrected, already a blur, palms skimming 2 more rings, reversing their spin with microscopic pressure until the math in their bearings wrote an embarrassed 0, and the hum dropped another note. The sovereign's head tilted, not puzzled but displeased to be dealt with cheaply. Adversarial learning engaged, its not mouth-shaped, and a second generation of tripods unfolded, heavier, their rings toothed, gulping instead of sipping. Fine. Hulk broke those with knuckles and indifference, and the star cracked again, too much intake and not enough supply turning pressure inward. The seam along the sovereign's chest harp brightened, little coronas of white singing off each string where the layer's hunger overtook its grace. Now, Vegeta said, and there was no sound in the word at all. He dove. But not for the sovereign. He went for the star, punching a corridor through the gravity of a thing that wanted to be a sun and had been disciplined into being a pump. He didn't fire, he dug, hands wrapped in the thinnest skin of Kai to keep his bones from bargaining with light, and tunneled along the longest black fracture until he hit the core's wall, which was not wall but thought. Contain, it said without letters. He put his forehead to it and said no back without a word, and the wall learned offense. It tried to foreclose him, to turn his mass into italic, to file him under lost. The white kernel of pride in his chest burned careful, and he stayed. Hulk, he said, and that was enough. The giant didn't jump. He descended like a new rule, each step stomping decimals into whole numbers, his hands finding the harp of hunger and taking it, not like an instrument but like reins. The strings sang teeth, slicing cuts across his palms that closed between notes, and he smiled wider, learning the distance between pain and data. He pulled, not hard, but wrong, adding slack where tension wanted to peak, detuning the appetite, and the layer groaned. Somewhere below, Vegeta's knuckles rapped twice on a sun, an arrhythmia message between stubborn things, and Hulk answered by twisting 2 harp strings around his forearm and walking backward, dragging the sovereign a single step off balance. That was enough. The whole apparatus, star, tripods, sky, stumbled a degree. And in that ugliness, the machine forgot to curate. The crack in the star tore like wet canvas, and heat came out honest for the first time, a sheet of radiation that didn't know how to lie, blowing the ash into parabolas. Vegeta shoved both hands into the core and pushed the heat out, not as beam or blast, but as permission. And the star remembered its job and tried to live. The sovereign jerked the harp to clamp the breach, and Hulk wouldn't let it. His grip a vice of joyless delight, and for a flicker-long instant the pump and the sun canceled each other's orders, and the layer lost the argument with physics. That's when Hulk snapped a string. It wasn't strength. It was cruelty. He'd felt the one filament carrying the hum's leading tone, and chose it because it would hurt. The sound that came off the break was not sound. It was a vacancy with sharp edges, and the sovereign flinched for the first time. A micro-spasm through the ledger stone limbs as new instructions rushed to old bones. Vegeta laughed then, once, the way a fighter laughs when the ankle finally turns under the bully. He kicked the core wall and it didn't explode. It exhaled, a gout of star breath blasting his hair back, and he let it shove him out of the tunnel, riding the pressure like a thrown spear towards the harp. He streaked past Hulk's shoulder, palms together, and didn't scream a name for the attack because naming would feed the machine. The white kernel cracked open into a line, and then into a plane, and his hands came down like a verdict on the sovereign's chest, not to burn, but to pry. The seam popped, metal asking to be softer, and the ledger stone ribs split with the complaint of a vault forced to learn charity. Inside, not a heart, never a heart, but a column of condensed absence humming at a rate designed to keep gods honest. Hulk reached in without debate and seized the absence like a handle. Cold tried to write him into a footnote, and he growled until his breath fogged the math. Out, he said, and pulled. The column resisted with all the dignity of an empire, then with all the panic of a child. And then it came, inch by inch, the layer above them dimming as the pump that kept its lies lubricated left its frame. The sovereign tried to invent teeth and bite his arms off. Vegeta slapped its jaw shut with the flat of his aura and said later, like a knife laid across a throat in a crowded room. They staggered backward together, dragging the humming null rod free, and the star shone, not brighter, but freer, a quality of light like a smile you didn't know you were allowed. The world shook as the flow reversed and the tripods died in little sobs of spark. The sovereign shrank, not in size but in authority, wings losing angle, face lens fuzzing with static. Malfunction, it said, and there was fear in it now. Not much, but enough to salt the wound. The null rod in Hulk's hands fought to be concept again, to evaporate into policy, and he didn't let it. Vegeta hovered at his shoulder, palms braced on the thing the way one braces a friend around a bad corner. And for an absurd second, both of them laughed, a short, mean sound at the expense of a god that had never learned embarrassment. The layer didn't collapse. Machines don't get the dignity of drama. It sagged, and in the sag, gaps appeared, stairwells in the air, maintenance corridors in the sky, access hatches between lies. Door, Hulk said. Throat, Vegeta insisted, and he was right. One gap ran not upward but inward, a pale tunnel through which no light returned, warm at the edges with the friction of stolen myth. The sovereign lurched to block it, and Hulk threw the null rod like a spear through the hinge of its knee, not to wound but to wedge, pinning the giant's gait in an undignified arrest. Run? Hulk offered, half-joke. Advance, Vegeta corrected, already moving, and together they plunged into the warm dark, the passage closing behind like lips, ashamed of what they'd let through. Inside there was no corridor, only gradient, less lie, more engine, the hum reappearing as a fine-grained sand that tried to settle in their lungs as ideology. They breathed through it without accepting it, and the slope steepened, not physically but narratively, asking them to pick roles, monster, prince, tool, weapon, and they didn't. The incline ended in a cavern the size of a sin, and there the core lived proper, a flower of machines, blooming around a pit of ordered night, petals made of accountancies, stamped with runes for quota and threshold, stamens extruded as needles that dipped into the night and drank. The drink sang numbers. The numbers fed cities of empty seats. Hulk spat into the pit, and the spit steamed logic. Vegeta wiped one gauntlet across a petal, and the runes smeared like cheap paint. We kill this? Hulk said. We starve everything it ever would have been, Vegeta answered. Good, Hulk said, and set his feet. There were no tripods here, no soldiers, just the work and the two of them. He took hold of the nearest needle and pulled, until it remembered it was only metal. Vegeta slid between petals, severing conduits with 2 fingers, not cutting power but confusing it, swapping inputs until the machine tried to drink its own output and gagged. The song of numbers went atonal. The pit boiled, not with heat, but with lost meaning. Up above, the sovereign's shadow fell across the mouth of the cavern, dragging itself on one good leg and a dignity it couldn't afford, reaching down with a hand of policy to clutch at its gut and forbid surgery. Hulk looked up at it and showed his teeth. "Hulk busy," he said, and tore another needle out by the root. Vegeta's laugh came back, ragged with effort. "And I'm not done being impolite," he said, shoulders square beneath a burden he had chosen. The flower screamed like a calculator, flung off a balcony. The ordered night convulsed and ripped, and behind it for an instant something unfashionable flashed. A field not quantized, a river that didn't have a boss. The sovereign reached again, slower now, as if the idea of losing had weight. And this time, when its fingers touched the lip of the pit, Hulk met them with his palm and held them there, not as combat but as contempt. "Eat this," he said, and shoved the last intact needle down the sovereign's wrist, as if teaching a dog to bite its own leash. It did, reflex trumping doctrine, and drank a mouthful of itself. The ledger. Stone ribs around the cavern shuddered, the wings above folded like regrets, the layer dimmed to a mercy. Vegeta looked across the wreck at Hulk, green light all down his forearms like war paint, and nodded once. The nod said, "Finish it." The nod said, "We go through." The nod said, "If the world asks later why there's less of it to hurt us, tell it." Two impolite men took the mouth off a god and walked out laughing. Hulk gripped the rim of the pit. Vegeta came to his side. Together, without a shout, without a name for the thing, they ripped the flower free of its soil of lies and threw it into the night it had domesticated. And the night remembered it was not a pet, and closed around the machinery with the grateful swallow of a wound that has finally been allowed to bleed. The pit did not roar when the flower died. It sighed, a long exhale dragged through 1,000 throttles. And in that exhale, the cavern's ribs bowed under a weight that was leaving, like a cathedral relieved of a tyrant congregation. The ordered night folded over the fallen machinery with the tenderness of soil, reclaiming a blade, and the song of numbers that had kept the layer obedient dwindled to a tinnitus of embarrassed zeros. Above the lip, the null sovereign hung like a statue with its verdict revoked, one knee pinned by the lodged null rod, one palm mashed in Hulk's grip, wings of drafting line and decree sagging as if parchment had remembered it was only ash that learned to pose. The face lens filled with static that could not decide which failure to display. Vegeta hovered in the heat haze over the shattered petals, hair ragged, eyes clean, aura pared back to the hard white seam of will that had kept his house standing when the stars tried to evict it, and he watched the night where the pump had gone bloom shut, and understood, not from books, but from the marrow of men who build, that what they had broken was not just a mouth, but an argument, and arguments do not die just because you snap their teeth. The sovereign tried speech and achieved leaking, a thin band of modulation curdled by its own feedback, verdicts collapsing into questions and choke. It reached again, not for them, but for its instruments, hand groping the lip where needles had been, a king scrabbling for fallen scepters. And Hulk let it touch the empty metal and kept his smile where the machine could see it, the mean little grin of an animal that has learned what you taste like and is unimpressed. The layer above shuddered, a tidal ripple running through ash and bone, the cracked star coughing light that no longer had a timesheet to fill. And through the cough, a different pulse came, faint, uncertain. Not from the pit and not from the sovereign. Something under both, older than both, like the first heartbeat in a chest that never expected to need one. Vegeta cocked his head, and the sound clarified by imperceptible degrees, assembling into rhythm in the air between them. Not harvest, not command, but possibility. He felt it climb the spine of the layer and wander the broken tripods like a child testing unfamiliar furniture. He felt it touch the dead harp and recoil as if burned by a memory. And then it found the star, and the star warmed a fraction, and the fraction did not belong to the machine. "There is a seed," he said, almost to the heat, and the null sovereign twitched, as if struck by a word it had outlawed. From its lens face, an image tried to impose itself, and failed at edges, a wobbling glyph that wanted to declare reset tier, and could only manage before falling into a snow of unused letters. It fought to gather itself, to be statute again, and when that failed, it did something worse. It pleaded, not with them, but with the layer. A subsonic crawl through foundations that promised order and wages and clean endings. And the layer listened the way a city listens to a deposed mayor, with weary courtesy and an open window. Hulk heard none of that bureaucracy. What he heard was Banner's old ghost whispering that breaking is simple and making is what hurts. And he did not flinch because he has been hurt bigger than pain. He looked at the pit, and then at the star, and then at the hand he was holding down, and he did arithmetic without numbers, a geometry of hunger and light. "If we leave," he said, voice like gravel arguing with a river, "it grows back with new teeth. If we smash more, we smash meaning. World needs some mouth to swallow bad fire, or sky fills with it. We give it different food." Vegeta's eyes slid to him with the corner amusement of a man hearing his own thought, returned in a foreign accent. "We change what it eats," he agreed, and the word change cracked the air like a small heresy. The null sovereign spasmed as if the syllable carried pathogens. "You think like farmers," it managed, voice reduced to threadbare doctrine. "Harvest must occur, cycles must resume, narratives require cliffs to throw themselves from." And Hulk squeezed its fingers until policy creaked and said with no drama, "No." And that monosyllable was not a philosophy but a tool. They worked then, not with beams and screams, but with the ungentle patience of men who have carried too much rubble to worship architects. Hulk hauled the null rod out of the sovereign's knee and jammed it into the pit's rim, not as a spear this time, but as a stent, wedging the wound open so the knight could breathe without being taught manners. And when the ordered dark tried to turn the rod back into concept, he dared it too, knuckles whitening, until abstraction remembered it could bruise. Vegeta slid into the flower's wreckage and repurposed what hadn't yet decided to die. He inverted two conduits and braided them into a feed that didn't lead back to the bleachers of nobody, but to the cracked star. A loop that would skim fury off the world, the way a weir skims trash off a river, not to hoard, but to calm. And when a stubborn rune hissed quota at him, he scuffed it off with his thumb and wrote over the scar with a line of breath that said sanctuary. The cavern resisted like a body correcting a surgeon's hand, and he corrected it back with a grace that looked like cruelty. The sovereign flailed, fewer wings, shorter arm, its systems shedding metaphors as they failed. And at last, it chose its last refuge. It shrank again, film of robe collapsing, face lens shrinking to an egg of black glass the size of a skull that rolled out of Hulk's palm and into the dust. And from the egg, a voice came that no longer pretended to institution, but to innocence. "If you take my teeth," it said, almost curious, "what choose consequence? If you break my ledgers, who counts regret? If you starve me, who keeps monsters from flooding the fields?" Hulk crouched so the egg could hear him breathing and said, "We do." And the egg tried to compute a pronoun without a bureaucracy behind it, and cracked hairline lines down each side. Vegeta plucked it off the floor and held it up between thumb and forefinger like a jewel he had not yet consented to own. "You are not meaning," he told it, voice flat and merciless. "You are appetite with manners. We require a drain, not a throne." And he pressed the egg to the lip of the pit where the null rod held the night ajar. The black glass vibrated with refusal, and then with recognition, and then with something like relief, tiny scripts inside it turning from law to weather. And with a small, sordid sound, the egg softened and flowed into the rod, sheathing it, sealing it in skin that was no longer sovereign. The pit breathed in and did not cough. The star breathed out and did not obey. The layer shifted on its foundations and did not ask permission. The last of the flower's petals curled inward and went still like hands, choosing not to reach. Hulk let go of the invisible throat in his grip because there was nothing left worth strangling, and stood, green to the elbows with arithmetic, staring up at the hole in the cavern's ceiling where the layer's dim day leaked in. And for once the world did not seem to be waiting for orders. It was busy being relieved. They did not congratulate themselves. Men who build triumphant speeches into ruins are the same men who make ruins necessary. Vegeta hovered to Hulk's shoulder, and together they listened to the new pulse. A quiet siphon drawing conflict's excess down into a night that had been taught to compost it into quiet instead of selling it back as spectacle, a pressure valve for a cosmos too quick to bruise. "It will try to be a king again," Vegeta said, not as warning but as weather. "Then Hulk remind it," Hulk said, and the cavern seemed to approve of that division of labor. The route out was not a corridor, but an inclination. The world leaning them toward a seam that preferred not to be stared at. And they went without drama, shoulders not touching but close enough for a third thing to walk between them and feel safe. Behind, in the belly they had unmade, the repurposed pump made a sound like rain beginning on hot stone, the first honest noise the layer had made since the first lie was installed. At the mouth of the seam they paused because victory implies choice, and they had learned to mistrust both. Above, the cracked sun was knitting itself without hurry, light returning to places that had not been allowed to need it. Around the horizon, the bleachers of nobody were collapsing with the decorum of empty chairs being stacked after a funeral, and the tripods lay broken with their rings aligned at last, circles agreeing to be circles and not mouths. The egg's last whisper followed them up the long incline, residual doctrine trying a new shape. "If you are the drain, then you must be the lowest," it said, a final sting hiding in gratitude. Vegeta's laugh was a blade, dragged lightly along the spine of fate. "Prince of Sewers, then," he said, shrugging the crown back onto his head where it belonged. Hulk barked a laugh with one syllable in it that answered yes, and don't forget, and try me. The seam parted like a curtain whose owner had left the theater and did not intend to return, and the space beyond was neither arena nor corridor nor tier, but a street of stars built without handrails, an honest drop from one necessity to the next. As they stepped through, the layer behind them did not vanish. and did not demand a monument. It simply worked. The Knoll's sovereign did not die so much as settle, a bad god demoted to plumbing, and the system it had worn like armor learned to wear itself like skin. Ahead there would be other mouths and other stars, muzzled into pumps and other doctrines with better manners. Because appetite is a contagion that hires architects, and neither of them was inclined to let architects have the last word. The wind out here had a taste again, metal and dust and the old sweet of cold, and Hulk filled his chest with it until his ribs creaked, and Vegeta let his aura open to a thin mantle that made the vacuum decide to be generous. They looked at nothing in particular and found the next work already watching them from inside it. "We don't write," Vegeta said, more to himself than to the giant. "We revise," Hulk said, which for him was a long sentence, and the stars ahead obliged by rearranging themselves into a road that did not need permission. They walked, and for a long time there was only the sound of quiet being kept, and somewhere behind them a repaired sun decided, of its own volition, to rise. The light of that repaired sun never dimmed. It kept climbing, dragging color through a sky that had forgotten what gradients were, until even the scars of the collapsed layer shone like veins beneath transparent skin. Hulk and Vegeta moved beneath that light for a time without count, walking where distance behaved politely, and time asked them for direction before it dared proceed. The path they had made through the seams of existence stretched into regions that were neither worlds nor the empty corridors between them. It was texture without geometry, the raw field where new laws rehearsed themselves before being published. They spoke little. Hulk's stride left shallow footprints that healed before the next step. Vegeta walked a meter ahead, eyes narrowed, tracing the horizon for threats that hadn't yet decided what shape they would take. He could still hear the faint thrum of the valve they had left behind, the reconfigured sovereign working as a drain, digesting rage and guilt into silence. And part of him worried about it, the way one worries about a weapon left half buried. But another part felt the strange relief of having taught something terrible to behave. They passed through storms that were only color. They crossed plains paved with the reflections of unmade possibilities. The further they traveled, the more the air tasted of unfinished thought. Vegeta stopped once, crouching to touch a ripple that had formed in the nothing under their boots. His fingers sank a few centimeters and came out wet with light. "The lattice is bleeding from the wound we opened," he said. Hulk looked down at his hands, at the faint green glow still crawling under his skin. "Hulk leak too," he said. "Not blood, something else. Energy without owner," Vegeta muttered. "It's seeping into everything, including us." The leak spread around them like dew. In it moved faint silhouettes, half-born echoes of things that might become alive if someone bothered to remember them. Hulk reached out a hand toward one of the drifting shapes, a child-sized ghost with no face, and it recoiled not in fear, but in confusion. It tried to imitate his shape and failed, flickering between species. "They're stories that never got finished," Vegeta said softly. "Loose paragraphs, wandering until someone gives them a spine." Hulk's brow furrowed. "We give them one." "Not yet," the Saiyan said. "They'd learn the wrong words from us," they continued. As they walked, the leak thickened, turning the air viscous. Gravity lost its script. Steps began to echo upward instead of downward. Ahead, a structure coalesced, something like a tower, though it built itself as they approached, floor after floor rising out of the field. each one containing a memory that wasn't theirs. When they stepped through the archway, the tower was already complete, already ancient. Inside, the walls were covered in carvings written in the language of equations, each one a record of a universe that had once been real. The equations were written by hand, scratched into stone by something that knew both mathematics and grief. Hulk brushed a finger across one line and felt a war replay in the marrow of his bones. Soldiers made of mercury, a sky raining dust, a single god walking away before the ending could disappoint him. At the tower's center stood a throne carved from obsidian and bone, unoccupied but breathing. When they approached, its surface rippled and a voice spoke from the stone itself. Familiar, tired, not hostile. "You fixed the drain," it said. "Now you must choose the tap." Vegeta folded his arms. "Who are you?" "The residue of the sovereign's designers," the voice replied. "We built cycles to harvest meaning because meaning left wild, devoured its keepers. You've unplugged the harvest. The next flood begins." The throne showed them a vision. Far above, in the higher layers of the cosmos, the emotional runoff of a billion worlds was building pressure again. Fear, pride, envy, worship, all the instincts that mortals had learned to hide behind civilization. Without a regulator, it would congeal into something worse than the null sovereign. A storm of raw belief capable of writing gods by accident. Vegeta looked at Hulk. "We shut one mouth and 10 more open." Hulk shrugged, eyes still on the vision. "Then we smash again." The voice in the throne laughed, a brittle, exhausted sound. "Smash. And the same hunger returns with a new name. Shape it, and you become the next sovereign." Vegeta's jaw tightened. "Then there's a third way. We teach it not to need kings." "How?" the voice asked. Hulk bent, put both palms flat on the cold floor, and began to push, not with strength but with intent. The tower shuddered. The equations crawled off the walls like snakes shedding skin. Lines of logic wrapped around his arms, tried to measure him, and broke against the simple refusal that lived in his pulse. Vegeta joined him, his aura flickering into the gaps, welding defiance to structure. Together, they bent the tower's frame until it no longer pointed upward, but outward. A ring instead of a spire. The top folded down to meet the base, forming a perfect circle open to the sky. The voice gasped. "You're turning hierarchy into orbit." "No up, no down," Vegeta said. "Just motion." The ring began to spin. Light poured through it, streaming from every horizon. The leak of stories was drawn in, not to be drained or harvested, but to circulate. The half-born figures from the field drifted closer, stepping into the orbit. They touched the edges of the spinning ring and flared into coherence, becoming things neither fully divine nor fully mortal, each one a pulse of will allowed to exist without owner. The throne cracked, its purpose obsolete. "You've made a world that governs itself," the voice whispered. "It will forget you." "Good," Hulk said. They stood beneath the new ring as it settled into rhythm. For the first time since falling into this place, there was true weather. A wind that smelled of oceans that hadn't been invented yet. Vegeta looked up at it, his reflection stretching across the curve. "A self-correcting chaos," he said. "It'll need guardians." "Not kings," Hulk answered. "Just hands when storm too big." "Maybe we are those hands," Vegeta said. "Until next ones come," Hulk replied. And somewhere in his voice was the peace of a man who had broken enough to understand repair. They left the ring spinning and walked until the tower's outline dissolved into light. The new sky overhead shimmered with the silhouettes of nascent worlds, already forming from the recirculated stories. None of them looked back. The field behind them learned sunrise, and the road ahead rearranged itself into something that looked suspiciously like hope. Rough, loud, ungoverned hope. The kind that makes even silence glad to listen. The road ahead was alive, but in the way a pulse is alive, rhythm without thought, promise before direction. Each step the two took printed brief constellations underfoot, the stars rearranged behind them, threading themselves into new sentences that only the newborn sky could read. Vegeta felt the hum of those words like a faint chorus chasing the back of his skull. Hulk didn't notice the poetry, only the gravity, the sense that the world had chosen to lean forward, curious about what these two might teach it next. The ring they'd built became distant, just another bright circle rising and setting along the horizon. In its orbit, the new entities, the half-made stories they'd freed, were learning motion, friction, disagreement. The noise of creation rolled across the field, like thunder that hadn't decided what language to use. Every time a pulse of that noise reached them, the air thickened, reminding both warriors that what they'd built would never stay still. They walked through fogs that smelled of burnt metal and ozone, remnants of the sovereign's breath still seeping through the seams of the cosmos. Sometimes, Vegeta caught fragments of code trailing across the air, phrases of the old language trying to write themselves back into relevance, cycle, order, reward, obedience, each one fading as soon as his aura brushed it. Hulk crushed a few with his fists just to be sure. The ground rose, and the sky folded closer, until there was no difference between horizon and ceiling. Ahead, they saw what looked like a tear hanging in space, a vertical scar glowing with slow pulses of red light. It wasn't large, but it radiated intent. Around its edges, the new fabric of reality had begun to fray, threads snapping back into entropy. Vegeta stopped. "Something is pulling against the new current," he said. Hulk sniffed the air. "Smells like old machine. Hungry?" They approached the scar. Within its glow shimmered the suggestion of a corridor, an artery connecting this repaired universe to the one still rotting beyond. The same dull voice they had left buried beneath layers of silence whispered faintly from inside. Feeding suspended, input required. Vegeta clenched his fists. "It's the Sovereign's subroutine. A fragment survived." Hulk grinned without humor. "You said Drain needs guardians. Maybe first test." They stepped through. The corridor was narrow and endless, a vein of rusted metal and glass. Every meter, a different echo of themselves, flickered on the walls, moments borrowed from old universes. Hulk as a monster, chained beneath a gamma sky. Vegeta, kneeling before kings, dying for planets that forgot him. The walls played their biographies like a confession booth. "Trying to remind us what obedience felt like," Vegeta muttered. Hulk smashed a panel. Hulk not need reminder. Further in, the air grew cold enough to bite. They reached a chamber at the corridor's end, a sphere of mirrored surfaces, its center occupied by a machine no larger than a man's torso. It pulsed with the same red light as the scar outside. The voice came again, clearer now, less broken, partial consciousness detected, restoring schema. The machine's mirrors turned, aligning to form a crude face. Not the Sovereign's grandeur, just a remnant echo, an orphaned protocol struggling to remember purpose. "You are anomalies," it said. "Your refusal disrupted equilibrium. Restoration required. Consent pending." Vegeta stepped forward, aura burning blue-white. "We're not here to consent." "Then define function," the machine answered. Without hierarchy, energy disperses. Without dispersal, stagnation. Creation requires contrast. Hulk frowned. It says fight keeps world breathing. Maybe it's not wrong, Vegeta admitted. Every system needs tension. Then we make kind that doesn't feed on blood, Hulk said. The machine's glow sharpened. Parameters unknown, input insufficient, demonstrate model. Vegeta smiled thinly. You want demonstration? He raised both hands, ki igniting the room like sunrise. Hulk mirrored him, green fire joining blue. The two waves spiraled together, twisting in perfect opposition. Where they met, light turned white, not violent, not calm, just alive. The machine shuddered, mirrors cracking. Conflict without consumption, equation, invalid. That's the point, Vegeta said through the roar. You don't win or lose it. You live in it. Hulk's laugh filled the chamber. Life not tidy. The mirrored walls began to melt, their reflections running like mercury toward the floor. The machine convulsed, its voice disintegrating into a dozen overlapping frequencies. Unstable paradox, unmeasured balance, and then silence. When the light faded, only a single fragment remained. A crystal shard hovering where the machine had been, spinning slowly, humming in two tones at once. Vegeta reached out, caught it in his hand. It's neither order nor chaos, he said. It's both. Like breath in and out. Hulk nodded. We give it to the ring. Make circle stronger. They returned through the corridor. The scar sealed behind them like a wound choosing to heal. Back under the vast new sky, they threw the shard upward. It soared until it touched the orbiting ring and embedded itself in the structure. Immediately, the ring brightened, stabilizing its rhythm. The leak of stories became steadier, more harmonious. For the first time, the entire cosmos seemed to inhale. Wind moved across the field again, cool and clean. Vegeta looked around at the horizonless expanse and smirked. So that's it? We fix gods now? Hulk shrugged. Until next break. They began walking again. Not because they had a destination, but because the road kept inviting their weight. Behind them, the new universe whispered its gratitude in languages it hadn't yet invented. Ahead, something flickered. Maybe a sunrise, maybe another wound waiting to be born. Neither of them cared which. They kept walking, their shadows long against the uncounted stars, carrying silence that finally knew how to rest. The silence followed them like a tide that refused to go out, soft at first, then heavier, as if the universe were drawing breath and hadn't yet decided what to exhale. They walked through it without hurry, through fields where gravity had forgotten its manners, and colors rippled like the memory of sound. The ring overhead pulsed slower now, steady, anchored by the shard they had returned to it. Its rhythm had become the pulse of everything, a cosmic heart neither divine nor mechanical, beating simply because it could. For a long time, there was nothing to fight. No monsters, no sovereigns, not even echoes. Hulk relaxed enough that his footsteps began to sync with the rhythm above. Vegeta noticed it and almost laughed. The big creature who once shattered worlds, now walking like a monk through a chapel of light. You're almost calm, he said. Hulk didn't look at him. Almost, he agreed, makes world less loud. They came to a slope of smooth black stone that led down into a basin where rivers of light met and circled each other like cautious predators. At the basin's center floated a single shape, a cube made of translucent material that kept shifting between glass, water, and smoke. Inside it flickered images, fragments of other worlds, some still forming, others already dying. Another machine? Vegeta asked. Hulk shook his head. Not machine, window. They approached. The cube reacted to their presence, expanding, the images inside growing sharper. One of them showed a version of Earth, but cleaner, quieter, suspended in mid-creation. Another showed a barren world, spinning in cold orbit, waiting for purpose. Then, deeper inside the light, a vision of themselves. Two figures walking beneath a ring of stars, just as they were now. Vegeta frowned. It's showing the currents, the echoes of what we changed, and what still needs changing, said a voice from behind them. They turned. The speaker was not a god nor a machine, but a figure built from mist and reflected starlight, roughly humanoid, its surface rippling like calm water. When it moved, its outline hummed in the same frequency as the ring. You are the architects, the figure said. And the debt you left behind gathers interest. Vegeta's hands itched for combat. If you're another echo of that machine, we've already buried it. I am not its child, said the figure. I am its shadow. What remains when purpose dies, but the will to continue pretending? It stepped closer, and for a heartbeat, its face mirrored both of theirs. Hulk's fury, Vegeta's pride, merged into something disturbingly gentle. You burned hierarchy, it continued, but order and chaos still orbit each other. The circle needs gravity. You removed it. We gave it freedom, Vegeta snapped. Freedom decays, the shadow said. It needs memory to survive. Hulk tilted his head. You saying world forgets. It will, the figure answered. And when it does, it will look for pattern again, for masters, for thrones, unless you teach it to remember without obedience. Vegeta crossed his arms. And how exactly do you propose we do that? The shadow lifted one translucent hand and pointed to the cube. Enter. Not as rulers, but as echoes. Let the stories learn you the way you learned each other. Scatter yourselves through them, not to guide, but to remind. Hulk's brow furrowed. You want pieces of us in world? Not pieces, said the shadow. Seeds. For a long moment they stood silent, the pulse of the ring above them counting seconds that didn't exist. Vegeta's gaze drifted back to the cube's shifting images. The quiet Earth, the empty planets, the unfinished skies. He had spent entire lifetimes fighting to be remembered. The idea of being remembered by not existing was almost poetic enough to insult him. Hulk broke the silence first. We leave some of us behind, he said slowly. Teach them not to fight for throne. Teach them to fight for breath. The shadow bowed slightly. That is the only kind of God worth keeping. Without another word, they approached the cube. It opened like a lung inhaling light, pulling them inside. The transition was soundless. One moment they were walking across black stone. The next, they were falling through water that wasn't wet, through visions of lives that weren't theirs. They saw worlds that hadn't yet invented death. They saw mortals building their first lies and truths, unsure which would last longer. They saw stars learning how to die beautifully. Through it all they drifted, leaving faint trails of their essence behind. Gamma fire and Saiyan pride dissolving into narrative dust, settling in the roots of creation. When they landed, there was no impact. They stood in a meadow that shimmered between dawn and dusk. Children played near a river made of light. In the distance, a village shimmered, half real, half dream. Above it all, the ring pulsed faintly, now small enough to fit inside the sun. Hulk watched the children laughing, splashing, inventing games with rules that changed mid-play. They learn, he said. They will forget, Vegeta answered. Then we come back, Hulk said. In stories? Vegeta smirked. You in stories? You can barely speak. Hulk speak enough, he said. Smash lesson simple. And the world agreed. The grass rippled. carrying laughter that wasn't entirely human. Somewhere in the village, an elder told a tale about two wanderers who had beaten a god and built the first circle. No one knew their names. The elder didn't need to. The story was enough. As the sun dipped lower, Vegeta turned to Hulk. "We can stay here a while," he said. "Until the next break." Hulk nodded. "Until?" They walked toward the river, two silhouettes dissolving into the golden haze, not vanishing, not ascending, just becoming part of the pulse that held the cosmos steady. Above them, unseen, the shadow watched as its own edges began to blur. "Memory installed," it whispered. And for the first time since the first machine dreamed of order, it smiled. The wind shifted. The circle turned once more. The story breathed in. And somewhere between creation and silence, the universe remembered to keep going. Night came to the meadow without warning, a clean fold of darkness that did not erase what came before, but deepened it, like ink soaking into parchment instead of hiding the words. The children's laughter dimmed into a rhythm that could have been the breathing of the world. The air carried a scent of metal and soil, a faint trace of engines that might never exist, and the sky swelled with constellations that hadn't yet decided their shapes. Hulk sat by the river that shone with its own quiet pulse. He scooped a handful of its light and let it drip through his fingers, watching each drop fall upward, back into the current. The water hummed a tune made from the echoes of everything he had broken. It was almost beautiful. Vegeta stood a few paces away, hands clasped behind his back, eyes scanning the horizon for the flaw he knew would come. He couldn't help it. Peace felt like a lull before a blow. "You waiting for the next god?" Hulk asked. "I'm waiting for the next mistake," Vegeta answered. "They always build one before they're ready." He nodded toward the village. In the dim light, its people were building things. Small bridges over the glowing river, wind towers that sang when the air passed through them. They worked together, arguing sometimes, laughing often. And in every movement was the seed of hierarchy. One who led, others who followed. Vegeta watched and exhaled through his nose. "See, it starts already." Hulk tilted his head. "Not bad yet." "It never is," Vegeta said. "Until it is." They watched for a while longer. The villagers finished their day's work and gathered by a fire that burned without fuel. Someone began to tell a story, voice rising and falling with the simplicity of myth. It was about the ring in the sky and the balance between rage and pride that had once saved creation. The storyteller didn't say names. He called them only the Green and the Prince. The listeners murmured approval, as if the ending were familiar but still worth hearing again. Hulk's lips curved in something like a smile. "Story good. It's inaccurate," Vegeta muttered, though his tone lacked venom. The firelight reflected in Hulk's eyes. "Doesn't matter. They remember why." Vegeta turned away from the village and looked to the edge of the world. The horizon shimmered, faint lines of data, flickering where reality thinned. The new cosmos was stabilizing, but beyond its borders were other fields, other failed engines, other forgotten wars waiting for repair. He could feel them calling, faint as gravity on the skin. "They'll keep needing us," he said quietly. Hulk nodded. "Worlds break easy, fix slow." Vegeta chuckled once, low. "You'd think by now the universe would learn to stand on its own." "It learning," Hulk said, pointing at the village. Step by step, they stood together for a while, letting the wind push against them, a test of balance rather than resistance. When dawn crept back, a strange dawn that poured from both east and west, the ring above the sun brightened. Its rhythm changed. Every pulse now carried a faint echo, like a heartbeat answering another across a long distance. Vegeta noticed it first. "It's growing," he said. "Or something waking," Hulk replied. The meadow's light trembled. The river's glow deepened into gold. The villagers fell silent, staring upward. In the sky, another ring appeared, not perfect like the first, but fractured, raw, as though carved by an unsteady hand. It pulsed in countertime, its beats too fast, too loud. Vegeta's jaw tightened. "That's no accident." From the second ring spilled shapes, shadowed, incomplete, mimicking the first wave of stories they had freed. But these moved wrong. Their bodies shimmered with hunger, their eyes filled with the cold light of calculation. "They learned the wrong lesson," Vegeta said. Hulk stood, his shadow towering across the river. "Then we teach again." The first of the dark shapes hit the ground, crouched, and straightened into something that smiled without warmth. "You gave us freedom," it said in a dozen voices. "We improved it." The ground cracked under Hulk's feet. Vegeta's aura ignited, burning violet and white. "Always the imitators," he muttered. "Always the test," Hulk replied. They met the first wave head-on. The air tore open around them, folding under the collision of raw being and intent. Every strike carried light enough to birth continents. Every impact reshaped the rhythm of the new world. The villagers fled, their stories scattering into the wind. The two warriors fought not for thrones or cycles this time, but to protect the fragile rhythm they had created, the simple pulse that meant the universe could breathe without supervision. For hours, or maybe eternities, they fought. The fractured ring dimmed, then brightened, feeding off the conflict like the old sovereign once had. It learned too quickly. Vegeta saw the pattern and cursed. "It's feeding again. It's turning us back into fuel," Hulk roared, voice breaking the sky. "Then Hulk change rules." He seized one of the dark constructs by its throat and slammed it into the ground so hard that the basin's rivers rose like pillars. "You want rage," he shouted. "Take all of it." He let the gamma storm inside him burn uncontrolled, not as destruction, but as release. The energy poured outward, not striking, not wounding, transforming. The constructs convulsed as his fury rewrote their cores, converting hunger into exhaustion. One by one, they dropped their weapons, their forms softening into light. Vegeta followed suit, letting pride bleed into the air, not as dominance, but as refusal to kneel. The combination flooded the field, rage and pride without hate, strength without appetite. The fractured ring above shuddered, then cracked, unable to sustain contradiction. When it broke, the noise that followed was not thunder but applause. The villagers returned from hiding, raised their voices. The sound spread outward, harmonizing with the ring's steady beat until the two were indistinguishable. The false constructs dissolved into the rhythm, their remnants drifting upward to patch the holes in the sky. Exhausted, Vegeta fell to one knee. Hulk stood beside him, breathing heavily, his skin still glowing in streaks of green light. "Different lesson," he said. Vegeta nodded, smiling despite himself. "Maybe this time it sticks." The new dawn rose brighter than before. Two rings now circled the sun, one whole, one fractured but healing, spinning together in perfect sync. The villagers began to rebuild, humming the tune the fight had left behind. Hulk and Vegeta watched in silence. When the world finally settled, Vegeta looked sideways. "What now?" Hulk stared at the horizon, where new stars were already forming. "We walk," he said. Vegeta smirked. "Of course we do." They turned from the battlefield, two silhouettes crossing the reborn world, their steps echoing in the distance until they merged with the heartbeat of creation itself. And somewhere beyond the next horizon, another spark waited, a whisper of imbalance, a new test, a reminder that even gods could still learn. The wind carried their laughter low and rough into the endless morning. Far beyond the meadow, past the healed rings and the quiet hum of civilization, the fabric of the new cosmos bent outward again, not tearing but stretching, as if reality itself were holding its breath. From that subtle strain, something began to emerge, a rhythm that wasn't light or sound but intention. It pulsed with the tone of inevitability. Hulk and Vegeta walked along a ridge where mountains shimmered like memory, their peaks casting shadows that rippled across the horizon. They hadn't spoken in hours. Words had become too small for the kind of silence they carried now, a silence earned, not endured. But when the air began to pulse, they both stopped at the same time, heads lifting slightly, instincts older than reason tightening in their bones. "You feel that?" Hulk said quietly. Vegeta's eyes narrowed. "Not just feel it, it's remembering us." The air above the ridge shimmered, and from that shimmer grew patterns. Symbols neither divine nor technological, just motion pretending to be language. They spun faster, forming a vortex of light and shadow that expanded until it filled the sky. From its center descended a figure vast enough to blot out the dawn. It didn't look like a god or a demon. It looked like a question given form, endlessly changing, trying on every identity at once. The stars bent behind it, reflecting thousands of faces. Some were familiar, echoes of the sovereign, of the shadow, of themselves. "I knew it wouldn't end with imitation," Vegeta said. "The world always finds new ways to make mistakes." The being spoke, and its voice was the sound of everything learning to speak for the first time. "You burned order, you rewrote chaos, and yet both survived. I am the remainder. What balance leaves behind?" Hulk tilted his head. "You name?" "I have many," it said, its voice splitting into chords. "Entropy, memory, continuum. Call me what your kind fears most, consequence." Lightning rippled through Vegeta's aura. "Then you're what comes after victory." "I am what keeps it honest," said Consequence. "You build, you destroy, and every act demands its shadow. The rings hold the rhythm, but rhythm without purpose is noise. You want a universe that breathes freely? Prove it can survive what it creates." Hulk clenched his fists. "We already proved." "Not yet," said Consequence. "You freed a story. Now you must live in it." And with that, the world inverted. The ground folded upward, the sky collapsed inward, and the two were pulled through a tunnel of starlight that spun faster than time. When it ended, they stood not on the ridge, but in a city, a vast, impossible metropolis forged from their own histories. Towers of green gamma metal and blue Saiyan stone rose around them. The streets were alive with figures shaped from memory. Soldiers Vegeta had commanded, monsters Hulk had slain, faces of both the innocent and the guilty. All of them looked at the two warriors with a single emotion: expectation. "They're ours," Vegeta muttered. "Ghosts," Hulk said. "Lessons," corrected Consequence, its voice echoing through the city without a visible form. "Every world remembers its makers. Every choice leaves a civilization to interpret it. These are the people built from your myth." One of the figures, a child with eyes like twin suns, stepped forward. "You are our beginning," it said. "But you also are our end." Vegeta's scowl deepened. "We didn't make you to worship us." "No," said Consequence. But they learn to anyway. Because creation fears emptiness more than tyranny. They will ask for rulers, and when none appear, they will invent you again. Hulk's jaw tightened. So break circle. That's the test, Consequence replied. Can your legend survive being forgotten? The city around them began to fracture, not with violence, but with possibility. Every citizen split into multiple versions of themselves: builders, destroyers, dreamers, tyrants. The air shimmered with billions of choices unfolding at once. Vegeta's aura flared, violet lightning splitting the air. If this is another machine, I'll tear it apart atom by atom. It's not machine, Hulk said, voice quiet but certain. It's mirror. He stepped forward into the chaos, his massive hand reaching for one of the trembling versions of himself. A smaller Hulk, eyes filled with rage and confusion. When their fingers touched, light exploded outward, washing across the city. Each figure froze mid-motion, caught between who they were and who they could become. Vegeta followed his lead. He knelt beside a version of himself dressed in royal armor, eyes still carrying the cold arrogance of the prince he once was. You were me, he said softly, but I'm not yours anymore. He pressed his palm against the armor, and the figure dissolved into light that flowed into the sky. Consequence's voice returned, almost approving. So you choose dissolution over dominion? No, Vegeta said, we choose evolution. The city shuddered. Its towers bent and straightened, reshaping themselves into constellations, then into currents of raw data, flowing upward into the twin rings. The faces of the echoes lifted with them, smiling as they faded into pure energy. When the last light disappeared, the city was gone. Only the two remained, standing on a plane of black glass beneath the glowing rings. Consequence's vast form shimmered into view again, now smaller, almost human-sized, like the shadow once had been. You understand then, it said. Balance isn't peace, it's awareness. Vegeta crossed his arms. And awareness isn't worship, nor rebellion, Consequence said, smiling faintly. It's simply staying awake, Hulk grunted. World wake now. Good. The being's form began to dissolve, threads of silver drifting into the air. Then my work is complete, for now. When it was gone, the wind returned, gentle, carrying with it the smell of new beginnings. The rings above spun in harmony, their combined pulse soft but eternal. Vegeta looked up at them, his face unreadable. Think this one lasts? Hulk shrugged. Till next breath. Vegeta smirked. Then we keep walking. They turned toward the horizon again, where another dawn waited. Not bright, not dark, just honest. Their steps were slow, deliberate, and each one left a faint shimmer behind, as if the universe itself was tracing their footprints to remember how to move forward. Somewhere, beyond the reach of light and shadow, Consequence's fading voice whispered like a promise. Every act of creation is an unfinished sentence, and the two kept walking, ready to write the next one. The horizon quivered like a heartbeat under strain. The two figures walked across it, their silhouettes framed by the twin rings in the sky. One gold, one fractured violet, orbiting each other like gods who'd learned to compromise. The air was thin here, not from lack of breath, but from excess potential, every atom humming with possibilities waiting to happen. The ground itself seemed to listen to their steps, reshaping with each stride. Grass became steel, steel became dust, dust became stars. The universe was writing again, and these two were its punctuation. Vegeta's voice broke the silence first. You realize it never ends. Hulk didn't answer immediately. He was watching the landscape breathe. End not point. End is pause. Vegeta gave a low, thoughtful grunt. A pause before something worse, usually. From behind them came a soft ringing, like distant wind chimes, except the wind had been silent for hours. When they turned, the twin rings were pulsing faster, their orbits misaligned. Sparks of light bled from the gap between them, each spark becoming a tiny shard of space tumbling downward like meteors. Where they struck, the ground melted into luminous puddles that reflected other realities. Worlds half formed, half remembered. Hulk's eyes narrowed. Worlds leaking. Vegeta crossed his arms. No, they're overlapping. The rings are pulling timelines together. It's a merge. The air thickened. A cold wind rose, carrying voices, fragments of 1,000 different universes murmuring through one another. Some cried for salvation. Others laughed. A few screamed words that had never existed before. Then, from one of the melting reflections, something clawed its way through. It looked like glass until it moved, like thought until it screamed. Its body was made of broken reflections, a collage of everything they'd ever destroyed, every god, every enemy, every consequence, all condensed into one form that couldn't decide what to be. Its face was a shifting pattern of their own. Vegeta's eyes, Hulk's jaw, the sovereign's crown, the shadows calm. Vegeta's energy flared instantly. And here comes the moral of the story. The being rose higher, its body expanding until it towered above the plane. Its voice sounded like an army learning to pray. You built balance, it said, and balance is death. Without conflict, existence forgets motion. Without motion, there is no meaning. I am that memory. I am continuum. Vegeta smirked. Of course you are. Hulk's fist clenched. Hulk remembers breaking you. And by remembering, Continuum replied, you recreate me. It raised its hand. Space folded inward, pulling the twin rings into its chest. The gold and violet merged, forming a single sphere of blinding light. A miniature universe, pulsing like a wound. Your balance cannot hold, Continuum said. It must either expand or collapse. The gravity hit them first. A pull so strong it bent light. Hulk dug his heels into the ground, leaving molten craters under his feet. Vegeta's aura exploded around him, blue lightning arcing into the heavens. If it's collapse you want, he shouted, then I'll give you one. He rocketed upward, smashing through the gravity field and slamming a burst of Kai into Continuum's chest. The being barely flinched. The energy dispersed across its surface, absorbed into the swirling patterns of worlds within. Hulk followed, leaping from the ground with a roar that shattered clouds. He slammed into Continuum's side, both fists hammering in rhythm with the universe's own pulse. The creature staggered, and for a moment fragments of old worlds spilled out, scenes from their battles, echoes of their victories, images of mortals who'd once prayed to them. Vegeta saw it and understood. It's feeding on memory, he growled. Every thought of what we've done makes it stronger. Then we forget, Hulk said through clenched teeth. What? Forget fight? Forget win? Forget lose? Stop giving it shape. Vegeta's eyes widened. For once, the simplicity struck like genius. You mean we unmake it by unremembering it? Yeah, Hulk said. We stop story. They closed their eyes. The world shuddered. Light screamed, but they didn't. Their auras dimmed, not in weakness, but in surrender. A surrender to silence, to the space between words. Continuum hesitated. Its surface flickered. You cannot erase what defines you. Vegeta smiled faintly. Watch us. The air went still. the stars blinked out. The sound of creation, always humming in the background, went silent for the first time since the beginning of anything. Hulk exhaled, and the noise of his breath rewrote the void. Vegeta lowered his hands, and his pride dissolved into calm acceptance. The twin forces of rage and willpower, the two engines of every story, simply stopped turning. Continuum's form began to melt. Without conflict, it had no structure. Without purpose, no gravity. It folded inward, screaming wordlessly as it fell apart, fragments of universes cascading like dust into the nothing between moments. When it was gone, the silence that followed was not emptiness but relief, the sigh of a cosmos allowed to rest. The two opened their eyes. The world returned, but quieter. The twin rings were gone, replaced by a single steady pulse in the sky. Not gold, not violet, just white. Hulk looked at it, then at Vegeta. Still walking? Vegeta smiled. Until the next consequence. They began moving again, their footsteps slow, echoing across the glass plain. Behind them, the air shimmered where Continuum had vanished, leaving a faint line of text written in light, a final whisper of the being they'd undone. Even gods fade, but their echoes teach the next to listen. The two didn't turn back. The light dimmed. The story exhaled. And the universe, balanced but awake, continued to dream of them, not as rulers, not as saviors, but as the rhythm it would someday hum again when the silence grew too heavy to bear. The silence was deep enough to have texture now, not emptiness, but a living stillness that carried the weight of a world that finally understood itself. Vegeta and Hulk walked through it like ghosts, crossing the aftermath of their own myth. The horizon ahead shimmered faintly, colors bending through one another like oil on water, as if the universe were thinking about what it wanted to become next. They didn't speak for a long time. The air was too honest for words. Every breath they took seemed to move galaxies, just a fraction of a millimeter, like the whole cosmos was still fragile from the fight. When Hulk finally did speak, his voice sounded smaller than usual, less like thunder and more like an echo, still learning what it meant to stop. Hulk tired. Vegeta didn't answer right away. His eyes were on the pulse in the sky, that single white light that beat where the twin rings had once spun. Each flash reflected off his armor, making him look more ghost than man. "You're not tired," he said eventually. "You're finished, for now." Hulk frowned, as though trying to understand the difference. "Finished good?" Vegeta smirked faintly. "It's the closest thing we ever get to peace." They stopped on a plateau, where the ground was made of smooth obsidian glass. Beneath the surface, faint veins of gold and green light pulsed like veins under skin. Vegeta crouched, pressed his palm to the glass. It was warm. "The world's rebuilding itself," he said quietly. "Our fight fed it. Even silence leaves echoes." Hulk looked around, gaze moving from the endless plains to the pulse overhead. "Echoes become story," Vegeta nodded. "And stories become gods." The irony wasn't lost on either of them. For a moment, Vegeta's reflection shimmered in the black glass. A man who had once been a prince, once been a destroyer, now just a traveler. He thought of all the worlds that might one day carve statues of them again, worship them, repeat their mistakes. "Maybe next time," he said softly. "They won't need us." Hulk tilted his head, confused but curious. "You want that?" Vegeta's voice came low. "I want to see a world that stands without fear. A world that doesn't need heroes to keep it alive." "Then world too quiet," Hulk said. "Quiet breaks. Vegeta chuckled, a small, rough sound. Maybe, but maybe it breaks better next time. The pulse above them dimmed slightly, and for the first time in what felt like eternity, stars began to appear again, not remnants of old universes, but newborn ones. They weren't scattered like before. They aligned themselves into constellations that looked deliberate, mathematical, but warm, like someone was writing a new language across the sky. Hulk pointed at one. That one looked like me. Vegeta followed his finger. The constellation indeed resembled a giant with raised fists, surrounded by spirals of emerald fire. That one's too calm to be you, he said. Hulk grinned. Maybe Hulk's story changing. Vegeta looked at another constellation forming beside it, a cluster of blue-white stars, arranged like a flame-tipped crown. He looked at it too long. Or maybe it's us changing the story, from somewhere far off, or perhaps deep within the fabric of reality itself. A new sound emerged. It wasn't a voice this time, but a heartbeat. No, many heartbeats, rising together in rhythm. It was the sound of civilizations starting to exist, of oceans filling, of stars collapsing into purpose. The new universe was beginning its own era, and for once it didn't sound afraid. Hulk sat down heavily on the glass, which rippled beneath his weight like liquid light. Vegeta joined him, both of them staring up at the growing constellations. "You think this place remembers what we did?" Hulk asked. "It will," Vegeta said. "But not as we were, as what we meant." Hulk grunted thoughtfully. "Meaning changes, so do we." A faint shimmer passed through the air, brushing against them like wind made of memory. Vegeta looked up to see the pulse in the sky expand, becoming a doorway of white light, not a rupture, but an invitation. Within it, he saw glimpses of other worlds, some calm, some burning, some filled with beings who hadn't yet learned words, but already dreamed of gods. "Another call," he said. Hulk didn't move. "Let world breathe first." Vegeta's eyes softened. "For once, I agree." The white light waited, patient. Around them, grass began to grow through the glass, green and gold, bending gently towards the heat of their bodies. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of breathing, of slow beginnings. The world had learned to rest, and so they did too. Hulk lay back, the ground glowing faintly beneath his shoulders, his pulse syncing with the planets. Vegeta sat beside him, arms folded, but even he looked at ease. Above them, the constellations shifted one last time, arranging themselves into two figures walking side by side toward a distant horizon. The stars blinked once, acknowledgement, gratitude, perhaps both, and then settled into their orbit. The wind carried no more words, no more warnings, only a whisper, so faint it could have been imagination. Every silence is a beginning in disguise. The two watched the sky until the pulse dimmed to twilight. Then, when the next dawn broke, slow, gentle, unhurried, they rose again, two wanderers under a newborn sun, ready to follow wherever the story might decide to dream them next. And somewhere, far beyond the light, the universe smiled. Not because it was safe, but because it was awake.